So you may have heard that an industry that's kind of important to Southern California is the entertainment industry. How many of you are familiar with the fact that no, I actually argue that Los Angeles is the most influential city in the world culturally, because I have heard Beyonce on 6 continents, and I don't know that there is any other city in the, I'm sure that London and New York are, I didn't know I was hearing on 6 continents, but it's incredibly important to our economy, and it's incredibly important to our real estate market. And so we did a program on real estate and entertainment at our retreat, which we do annually for the Lusk Center about a month ago. And moderating that panel was Carl Muhlstein, who just did such a great job. I was hoping that he would redo it here. And we have a slightly different makeup of the panel today, but still an excellent one. And I'm going to let Carl from JLL introduce our panelists. But the one thing I will say in introducing Carl is you want to connect with him on LinkedIn, because he writes the most interesting LinkedIn posts. And some days they piss me off. I'm just going to be straightforward about it. But he's always thoughtful. He always shows that he cares deeply about the city in which we live in these posts. And I think he gets it right, I don't know, far more often than he gets it wrong. And there's nothing wrong with being upset with people. I like living in a country, by the way, where you can offend people every now and then. It's what makes us what we are.
It's a new pleasure.
Carl, thanks for being here.
Thank you. And it really is great to be here for a couple of reasons. I noticed a lot of familiar firm names, though I probably deal on the other side of your walls with the transaction people while you're busy sweeping up the money for them to work with. So, but I think it's important from the source to become more familiar with the opportunities in terms of the capital stack, construction financing, bridge debt, long-term debt. Now we have ground leases entering the picture to help bridge that gap. Then there's the OpCo-PropCo side, investing in the operating side of the business, the RevPAR side, similar to hotel management. And then there's the equity side with the operators. Some are public REITs, but most are private, and everyone is in a consolidation and global platform buildup, because the one-off studio owner cannot accommodate the problem solving, the logistics, the needs of the users. So there's been a tremendous roll-up. It's no different than when Apple goes to Westfield and says, I want that key location in your #1 mall. And Westfield says, okay, but you know what? I need one of your stores in the Sherman Oaks Galleria. I need one of your stores in Fox Hills. I need that energy. So it's very similar on sound stages. The other reason I'm glad to have this audience is for you to understand the importance of the industry to the local economy. This morning's article in the New York Times business section about data centers, you know one of the big drivers is the entertainment industry with the voluminous data needs. When I first did work for Technicolor, they would make me open my briefcase when I left meetings to make sure I wasn't stealing any copies of anything that could be easily duplicated and end up at the Santee Alley for $7.99 a copy. But today, no one touches the material, and it's become a global business. So something will be shot here locally. The pipes will take the data to Taiwan or Korea for post-production, for colorization. The pipes will take the data to Vienna, where it's easier to man a scoring stage and do the soundtracks for. So technology has really taken hold. But again, I don't care if you're putting money into multifamily, office, industrial. This driver in Los Angeles, Atlanta, Chicago, New York, Toronto, Vancouver, London. I'm sure I missed a few.
Just a couple.
Just a couple. It's a tremendous, well-paying, professional job creator, and so everyone benefits from it. So joining us today to help move the point forward, to my right is Michael White. He is one of the managing principals of Gensler. The sun never sets on Gensler country. They are global. They have projects, every food group around the globe. But Michael has really stood out in terms of understanding the studio business and all the intricacies of the workflow. Michael's going to give us a brief introduction on the impact in Los Angeles and also what goes in the box. So these boxes, these sound stages, many of them are 100 years old. And you're going to see how, in one example, I had Johnny Carson transition to Jay Leno, transition to Activision Blizzard Studios, transition to Madison Square Garden Sphere R&D rollout, and their lease is up soon, so I'll tell you what the next transition is when I figure it out. And then to my left, Jason Hariton is very influential in the industry. First, he was head of global production for Netflix, I'd like to say during the go-go years. And when speed to market ramping up was the most important aspect. And now he is aligned with Hackman Capital Partners and the MBS operating platform, again, for a global approach to satisfying this industry. Locally, they've cornered the market. No one's here from the Department of Justice, right? Locally, they've cornered the market on the independent third-party studios, and we're watching them grow globally. So with that, Michael, why don't you give us a brief...
We have the clicker?
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Carl. It's really great to be here. I have to apologize to Spencer. Number one, that was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I was the one in the room who sheepishly raising their hand is never taking a finance course because I'm an architect. I think I was the only one in the room, so I was a little embarrassed by that. But what's been great about my role at Gensler, I'm on the board of directors of the firm. We're a 7,000-person firm with 54 offices around the world. But like you, we're trying to figure out where do we invest our time and our money. And we've really come down to two kind of basic ideas, one of which is really understanding where the market is going, where we need to be so that we can get hired to design projects for that in the same way that you're investing in real estate. We have no business if somebody's not building something. The second thing is really around this idea around expertise. And as Carl mentioned, I've spent the last 30 years of my career really diving deep into the tech media industry, and in particular, living here in LA and working on the studios. So what I wanted to kind of run through very, very quickly with you is just kind of a history of LA, a history of the studios in LA, and what's kind of driving the real estate side of that. From my perspective, the opportunity for me to design projects. From Carl's perspective, the opportunity for him to lease real estate, and Jason to develop opportunities for people to build and occupy these spaces. So what's really fascinating, if you look back at the history of LA, you think of the creation of these major, amazing studios. Universal in 1912, Disney, Warner Brothers in 1923, Fox and MGM in 1924. And so if you look at that 10, 20-year period, it's amazing the amount of investment that flowed into LA, the amazing amount of design opportunities, real estate opportunities, construction opportunities. And when I talk about numbers, I'll show you some numbers later. I talk specifically about construction cost. Carl will talk about land value at some point, and Jason can talk about operating costs. But so when I start showing you the numbers, they're actually a smidge of what really happened. But if you think about what Universal did in 1912, it was fairly phenomenal. It was, over 500,000 square feet of ground-up new buildings built in a single year, right? You look at what happened at Paramount Studios in 1912. You look at what happened at Disney in 1923. Beautiful campus, horribly old photograph, but beautiful old buildings, many of which are still there. Warner Brothers in 1923. And as you're starting to notice, there's a typology of buildings that were all built at that time. From an aerial view, they look like airline hangars. In fact, during the war, Warner Bros. Actually had to make sure that people knew that this was a film studio and not a military base. So it was really interesting. The typology of these buildings are very warehouse, but each one of these are 30, 40 feet tall, 25, 30,000 square feet in volume. But you can see there's a fairly consistent typology of architecture that's being built there. You'll also notice that, and actually this is Jason company now owns this lot. This is the old MGM Culver Studio lot back in the day. Fox Studios in Century City. Of course, all of Century City at one time used to be the studio lot. It's now maybe a tenth of Century City. So you see what happened during that period of time. There was over 3 million square feet of studio space, not office space, not other, just studio production space, which is a phenomenal amount of construction back in the 20s. And in today's dollars, roughly over $300 a square foot for this. This is over $1 billion worth of investment that happened in a very, very short period of time, all around a single product type, which was film, right? Talking films, color films, all of that started making the business bigger, but this kind of drove the business. So then when we advance a little bit forward, and you think about when I arrived in LA, what was happening was film companies were starting to merge with broadcast companies. 20th Century Fox created the Fox Television Network, NBC bought CNN, Time Warner became a big thing where they had film and television and cable. You look at Viacom dealing with Paramount and CBS. This idea around satellite and cable merging into, so a technology now merging into what was otherwise a film. When they used to talk to Carl when he was exiting one of the studios, they were looking for reel-to-reel, tapes of film. Now things are starting to go digital. So you started to see a transition of product type and technology driving, in my view, architecture and design and real estate at the same time. If you start looking at this whole idea around mergers and acquisitions, it's pretty phenomenal that you think of a company like Disney in 1995 acquiring ABC, 2005 Pixar, in 2009 Marvel, Lucas, and it keeps going on. So this idea around mergers and acquisitions in our world drives real estate, because you have consolidations, you have new needs that are created. The transition from analog technology to digital technology means that people were in antiquated buildings that they need to move into newer, higher tech buildings. So it created a churn that happened back in that period. And again, there was over 3 million square feet of production facilities were built during that period of time to accommodate for that growth of broadcast, growth of cable, growth of digital, all within a very, very short period of time. So where are we today? It's no mystery, right? You have the traditional media companies that are now becoming blurred with tech companies. You have companies like Amazon, and I think many of them are going to tour your studio later today, which is a fabulous, amazing campus, but you have a Amazon tech company now with Amazon Prime and Amazon Studios actually now creating content. You have Apple doing the same thing. You have Google investing in it and so forth. So you start having a blur between mega tech companies and traditional media companies. And then where we're headed is all of the social media companies. I've got a 16-year-old son and an 18-year-old daughter, and they are consuming content like you wouldn't believe, which is really one of the things that's starting to drive all of this. We're able to consume content. By content, I mean television shows, streaming online, movies, so forth. We're consuming content at a much more rapid rate than we ever did before, which is what's starting to drive, or which is still driving this part of the puzzle. So from a design standpoint, we're kind of at the leading edge of stuff. People come to us and say, hey, we're thinking about building this, that, or the other thing. How much is it going to cost? Where should we do it? And in a normal world, most of the stuff we get brought in to do, there's a certain percentage that goes forward. The problem that we started to have more recently is that part of it is because of the slowdown in the office market. You had developers who were otherwise doing office are now kind of looking at studio production space. So we're getting invited to do things very, very, very quickly. And from a cost standpoint, that can be quite costly because we, generally speaking, don't make a lot of money when we evaluate for something for somebody before it's a real deal. They don't have any money. They don't own the land. So we had to come up with some idea about how to formulate, which is what I'll go into in a second. Right now on the boards at Gensler, we are designing 169 sound stages around the globe. 169 sound stages in 15 different studio lots for over 3.3 million square feet of new sound stages, 8 million square feet of ancillary support production space around the globe. It's a great business for us right now. The question is, will it continue? What's the need? Is it going to continue on? So what we developed, and Carl's going to go through a much broader map of the scene in LA, where everybody is and what's driving it. But what we had to come up with is a way to tell a story to an investor who was trying to evaluate a property, whether it was going to make money or not. And there's very simple rules that we came up with that we needed to be able to, on one hand, educate a developer who didn't know anything about the film company, but also evaluate a property from an entitlement standpoint, square footage standpoint, location standpoint. Is it even worth continuing down the path? So we came up with a kind of key drivers around truck access, stage sizes, sustainability, infrastructure, location, security. There's a little checklist that we go through. We came up with a kind of Sesame Street way of explaining what are the kit of parts, what are the things that need to go into this in order to make this work. The size of the stage, there's production offices, the mill, the parking for the trucks, the parking for the cars, so that you can very, very simply kind of organize that thought. What are the various different ways of laying these things out? Because this starts creating square footage. And what's different between a normal office investment developer, where you're basically stacking offices on top of when you're building a 5-story building or a 20-story building, the algorithm that you use to figure that out is very different than what you do here, because the ground floor real estate on these properties is premium. You have trucks, you have sets moving back and forth, you have the sound stage, you have actors going back and forth into the sound stage. So the horizontal real estate is a very, very important consideration when you're trying to figure out whether it's the right property or not. You need more horizontal space, and you actually don't need vertical space typically, especially now with the office market slowing down so much. The idea of having vertical entitlements on your land is not nearly as valuable as having the horizontal space. So this started to allow us to get to that. Then when you get into what is the box, these things are expensive, right, if you do them right. And there's a kind of debate going on in the industry, like how much money do you really need to spend on these to get people to lease them versus what are the actual film companies asking us to do from a sound criteria standpoint, so you can keep noise outside of the stage, so you can get the right power loads for the new digital technology that's going on here. But it's a very, very different kind of product type. And kind of breaking the pieces out, we've really studied the sizes of the stages that people are looking for. You see the circular piece in there. Jason may talk about that later. That's the new cutting edge technology called a volume, which is where a lot of the special effects are being now filmed in. Highly expensive, huge energy suck, really interesting technological advance in the business. So that's a very, very quick overview. I'm going to leave it up to Carl and Jason to take you into more of the current stuff. One of the things I didn't really talk about is this idea around storytelling and the idea around creating a unique sense of place, which when you're there, think about how that building and the facility looks with all the mansions and the bungalows. The idea was, how do you get a company like Amazon that's not known as a legacy entertainment company to create an ambiance that people believe that they're invested in the creative?
What was really amazing that Gensler, helped accomplish at Culver, that you'll see later at the Culver Studios, is that exactly as Michael was saying, Amazon was coming because of the over 100-year history of film, but their actual use case needed modern office, textile office space, technology, et cetera. So combining the two and still having it feel like a historic campus was an impressive job.
There it is. So it's a finite trade area. If you're in New York, it's a circumference around Columbus Circle. If you're in Los Angeles, it's 30 miles as the crow flies from the intersection of La Cienega and Beverly. Why La Cienega and Beverly? Because the AMPTP the organization that represents the studio owners, were above the Rexall in the office space once upon a time at that intersection.
Well, a little trivia, that's where TMZ comes from.
That's TMZ, right. So that 30-mile zone is finite. If you look on Google Earth, however, tremendous patches of single-family residential, commercial arteries, mountains. I did a search once for 10-plus acres between east of downtown Boyle Heights up through that Simi Valley in the upper left corner. After taking out the Home Depots, the auto wrecking yards, the schools, the churches, everything else, we found one 10-acre site, which we bid on, and Tesla outbid us for a charging and customer delivery center. So land very constrained in this area. And then we like to use the term techtainment because YouTube Studios is here. ByteDance has gone from 10,000 feet to about 150,000 feet. There's just all sorts of pressures and influence in the area. Anyone who see me, if you want to get this, it's a simple cheat sheet on some of the major studios in the area, their websites. Actually, you should visit Jason's website. It's MBS Group did a stunning one. But again, it shows you the nature and also entitled for expansion. A lot of them are entitled. They overreacted in the go-go days. They gave in to too many municipal asks, mitigation fees, all sorts of things. And they've held back because when Michael talked about this one-story layout, when they start crowding studio lots with these big buildings, it takes away the charm of what is a studio lot and the functionality. This is back to I don't know, 20 years ago. I worked on this with Gensler. The impact on different real estate food groups from this industry. From trying to get a reservation at a good restaurant on Saturday night to why are there more German cars in LA than in all of Germany. So you figure it out. You do the math with how that works. There's sort of a pattern here. I talked about the mountains and the natural, but you can see we coined this term the S-curve. So Glendale, Burbank, through the Hollywood Hills, and then out to the ocean with Santa Monica, Culver City, etc. There is no one area submarket that can hold these large users. So Sony, I have Days of Our Lives in Burbank. We just did Sony Music Publishing in the eastern edge of Hollywood. They just signed a lease in Wilshire Courtyard for animation next to Beverly Hills. And then, of course, they have an iconic studio in Culver City. So they're used to fragmenting out with different needs. We won't get into that, but Jason later is going to get into the operating side. So many investors approach me, so what's the rent on the stage? What's the % occupancy? And I say, I'm sorry, you're in the wrong business. That would be like when I click on a hotel room on Expedia and I get my final bill, there's no relation to the two. So there's the rent. The reason there are no brokers really involved in leasing sound stages per se is because they're all package deals. Back to my Westfield Apple example, there's a lot of diverting productions and moving it around, et cetera. So we'll let Jason get into the Kabbalah of math behind that. So Jason, from your point of view, Michael Hackman bought his first studio, Culver Studios, 8 years ago?
Yep, 2013.
2013. I sold it in 2004, got foreclosed on. He picked it up. And from there, $7 billion under management globally? Somewhere around there?
Little more.
Little more. Oops.
It's about just over 10 million square feet of soundstage space.
And the growth of this, you did not buy another public company. This was hand-to-hand combat, one
Yes.
at a time.
Correct. Yeah, it was all organic growth. A couple of the acquisitions, and Carl can certainly speak to it, were public offerings, but even then, it was a very small set of buyers, of a buyer group. And so it was absolutely a hand-to-hand combat thing. It's a very small world, even globally, the production industry.
Right. And so maybe you could share with the group the customer service aspect, the OpCo, PropCo, what goes into the secret sauce?
Absolutely. I mean, it is definitely an operating business. I think one big mistake is that people often think there's definitely correlation in terms of investment, but people often think of it's another sector of the real estate industry. And I would argue that it isn't. We can look at it as one and make assumptions that way, but it isn't. I guess you could probably compare it to something like an all-inclusive resort. With a lot of moving parts, so, or if you're going to that hotel, as Carl mentioned, and you're going to have an event, it's like, basically it'd be like somebody saying to Carl, how much did you pay for your event at the Westin? Well, you can't answer that question. What was the event? How many people were there? What style of event was it? What kind of lighting did you have? All those things, and that's the world that we're living in when we say, what'd you pay for the soundstage? The box is just the starting point. Also, I think Carl mentioned a really important point, which is the customer service end. So it is a very specific, often technically driven, but specific operating business. And so by that I mean, not only are these all these components, but oftentimes what really throws people is, this is something that's probably difficult on the Gensler side, and they've done an amazing job of wrapping their heads around it and working collaboratively, is there's not one solution for all types of production. And so, and there's also not one price point. So depending on the production that comes in this month versus in 6 months from now, if it's a single camera versus a multi-camera, if it's a talk show versus a game show, these are all very different. And the customer service and the interaction that's required to operate those productions from a facility standpoint is unique as well, both from a personnel, technology, pricing, et cetera. So as we've grown our platform globally, one thing that, a good example of that is that we have everything from, the former CBS Radford or Culver Studios that you'll see these flagship campuses to converted warehouse in major markets. Now, some of those converted warehouses are used for some of the largest films in the world and television shows. It depends on the specific market. So I'll kind of leave it with this final point on the customer service side is that it's not an if you build it, they will come scenario. So for example, you would think logically, well, if I'm just a mile away from that facility and I build brand new and I have the highest spec tech and I spend every dollar I can, then they're gonna go there instead of there. And the truth is I can rent a rundown bungalow before it's even fixed up at our studio Raleigh in Hollywood for double the price of the brand new bungalow that we built somewhere else, even if it's close by. It's a business of mojo, I often call it. So it's something to keep in mind that you have to understand that. You have to not only understand the customer base, you have to be the customer base. You actually have to be a physical production content producing partner to succeed in the business.
So from the financing point of view, what's going through your heads is probably, God, how do I get my arms around this thing? On the construction debt side, the A pieces are pretty much plentiful. Even digital banks like Axios, Bank of Ozark, et cetera. the B pieces, many of the private equity firms stand by and participate to get on construction debt right now. I think you're looking at 55 to 65% of cost. But again, there's no, I get the question, so what lease is in place when it's finished? No, there is no lease. It's like you're building a wedding party hall, and when it's done, people are going to book it for weddings. They don't book it in advance of construction. So historically, tenants paid a 3-tier pricing: prep, shoot, and strike. They had a better rate when they're setting up. The contractor is there with the carpenters. They're digging a pool in the floor of the soundstage. They're building a house. They're building a 2-3-story house. They're bringing a full-size airplane fuselage on your SEAL team set. So when you see them jump out on watching SEAL team, it's in a soundstage. But don't be scared. So there's that. Then there's the shoot, which is a higher price, the days when they're in actual production. And then there's the strike. Get rid of that airplane fuselage, clean it up, broom clean, ready for the next production. We went from there in the speed to market to long-term leases. Amazon, Netflix, many of the household names signed 10, 15-year leases, forward commitments. Right now, Jeff Worth locally is about to break ground on 925,000 feet, fully committed for Warner Brothers Discovery for 15 years. So we went to that route. Then with COVID, some of these tenants were thinking, why am I paying rent on a stage that's sitting empty? Then comes a writer's strike. Well, God, I'm still paying rent on a stage that's empty. But the developers, also the landlords, were thinking, you know, while it's sitting empty, no one is using my extra services. And I'm losing out on the OpCo side of the equation. So right now we're at an interesting junction as we come out of this strike as to what will happen. However, unlike hotels who shed their bricks and mortar decades ago, because they could tie up long-term management agreements and make a better yield, the big corporate studios really hold on to their lots.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's an ego thing.
I think it's a bit of both, like history, if you think of something like a Paramount or you know, a historic studio, but also where are you going to get urban fill locations of 60 acres with, you know, that are covered in low-rise buildings right now? The land values are amazing. The long-term highest and best use isn't the studio. Some of them have historic components, but as redevelopments, as like Fox is contemplating, for example, they're worth a ton of money.
But that's a slow process.
It's very, very.
Meanwhile,
very
their stock prices they save real estate at a low book value for a rainy day. I think it's drizzling right now.
I think to Carl's point, you see a lot of content studios around the world, even broadcasters as well, you know, whether it's the BBC in the UK or it's CBS here, that are looking to still maintain they're growing their content production activity, but they're actually looking to get some of their assets off the books and put that money into content. And so that's why you will see some maybe unique divestitures that Carl's even been involved with recently.
So a studio is like an aircraft carrier. It has all the support functions on the ship. And then they're shooting Leave It to Beaver in a neighborhood. They're shooting the chase scene for Ronin in another or Heat in another neighborhood. There's all this work going on, location shooting, and that's why a lot of these names came to Southern California to develop these studios, because within an hour, you could shoot a beach scene, a mountain scene, a desert scene. You had backdrops. MASH could be out by the Conejo Valley, and you had all these backdrops.
That's a great point, is that especially if you think about a TV show, for every episode of TV, let's say on average, they shoot for 8 full days of filming. And about half of those days, sometimes it splits, 3 days this and the other way, about half those days are off lot, that aren't shot inside the soundstage. They're on location around the area. So the economic development component, as Carl mentioned earlier, is huge. I mean, for us, for example, for MBS Group, we own 130 sound stages. We have 80 sound stages in development right now around the world. And so, but in perspective, we operate and service 600 sound stages around the world. So we have all those additional sound stages that we're providing the service to. But my point is actually, when you add in the locations, it's about 900 productions, high-end TV and film, that we're servicing around the world per year, when one studio might only have 4 or 5 shows. That's it. So you do the quick math. If we operate 40 campuses and there's 3 or 4, average productions at each campus, how do we get to 900? It's just that it creates this ecosystem around the studio.
So you've had James Cameron camped out at Manhattan Beach. Oop, did I break a confidentiality agreement?
You said it. I didn't say it. No, it's been public.
So yeah, Avatar's been produced there. Now you have Mandalorian on a virtual stage.
Yes, so that campus, is, to Carl's point, is one of the first master leases that was done by Marvel before Disney bought it. And then actually after Disney bought it, they pulled Marvel out of California to go chase the tax incentives elsewhere in Atlanta, Georgia, actually. It's part of MBS's growth story to Georgia. And so half the campus is Lucasfilm shooting The Mandalorian and the spin-offs on virtual production stages, which that was kind of the pioneering. Now they're more prominent on the high-end budget. And then the other half of the studio is the long-term home for Lightstorm, which is James Cameron's production house. So that's the Avatar show.
So Michael, we talked about location shooting. What's the impact now with virtual stages on the box? How are you dealing with that?
Well,
in terms of design.
I'll answer it. I was going to go just to another point real quick, is that one of the things that we're all really wrestling with is, like, where's all this going? Are we at the beginning or the end of the peak of this, right? And obviously, interest rates being higher, slowing down the construction for sure. The writer's strike has frozen everything from a decision-making standpoint. There is a question, has the market been saturated? I'm not sure we know the answer to that yet. I'm much more optimistic about that when I watch how much stuff is being consumed out there. From Gensler's standpoint, we track the dollar volume of signed contracts that we get every week. And on a rolling year-over-year basis for the last full year, we're at 150% more fee revenue in signed contracts this year than we were last year, which would lead me to believe that we're going to be 50% busier than we were last year. And that's not happened. So there's something really interesting going on, which is from a revenue stream standpoint, from the actual money that we're making, we're pretty level compared to where we were last year, which, given the economy, we're perfectly happy about that. But what's interesting about that, what it shows is there's people who are optimistic, or maybe taking risks or gambling, who are going for it, hiring us to begin the developments of projects but aren't going forward with them, which is a really interesting phenomenon that we're in, that we're interested to see how this plays out. There's one theory that is, when the writer's strike is over, there's going to be an avalanche of pent-up demand that's going to fill this, and the optimist in me would hope for that, right? So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. To your question about the technology, yeah, we were invited into one of Jason's stages recently to retrofit a stage to upgrade it for the volume technology that's out there. We're working with companies to upgrade the amount of power. Sustainability is a big thing. So how are we getting clean power and safe power, and what's the most efficient way of transforming some of these old 1920s sound stages to have state-of-the-art technology in an old box, so it juxtaposes Absolutely. The value of this is where these great movies. There's a lot of superstition in the film industry, which is, this is the box where all this amazing stuff was created. If I go into this box, it's good. What did you say, juju?
Mojo.
Mojo. So we're really optimistic about the kind of transition that technology is driving, because it's driving work for us.
Well, and it's the as everyone is looking to lower the cost of production, it costs a lot of money when that aircraft carrier is sitting there and they move off the boat and they go to a location, as opposed to Dune or some of these other shows. They bring Mars right to Manhattan Beach Studios.
Yes.
You don't have to fly to Mars.
Although Dune was in Budapest, but on a soundstage. And but it's a good example. Is that and people often ask, do you think there'll be less soundstage use now that you're seeing an increase in technology like virtual production? It may be counterintuitive, but it's actually the exact opposite. So sound stages need to be larger. There's longer usage of the sound stages driven by the virtual production. As Carl said, you're not going to move the big video wall 3 times during your shoot. So those kind of drivers actually are very positive for the industry. It's a very expensive technology. It's something, if you think about, like, you hear green screen now, you can do it in your garage, you can do it in your house, but it wasn't that way at first, right? It was something that was, basically using a green screen or a blue screen was expensive, and so virtual production is the same. I mean, it's not going to get as cheap as green screen, but right now we're in the beta VHS side of virtual production, I like to say. Every content creator is using different technology, different screens, so you have to be super careful about how you invest as an equipment provider. We're the largest provider of motion picture lighting and grip and video technology, so the motion picture equipment around the world, and in Canada, the U.S., and the U.K. and Ireland. And so in those areas, we have to be super careful for that reason. So we're investing in partnership with those major content creators, because they all use something different.
So the studios all sit on hundreds of thousands of hours of original programming, and a lot of that original programming has to be reformatted, because you're watching it on an airplane, you're watching it on your iPhone, you're watching it on your screen, you're watching it with new sound, new Dolby, new surround sound, new technology. So there's always, even though once they shoot the product, it's not a static issue that it's put into the vault, into some data center, and it just goes to sleep. It's always being worked on.
And to that point, like, the streaming side of things have added, and as you saw from Michael's presentation, that now they're seeing just everything combining, where streaming ultimately will combine with traditional distribution sources. And you have this sort of forever life of the content, but even more so, you have a very global life. So we talked about it in terms of we used to just have global for local, right? You produce American global content, and then it could play locally somewhere else outside of the U.S., and including the U.S. And now we have also local for global content. And that was something that used to be very, very small potatoes, and it's now the opposite. The majority of Netflix's subscribers are outside the U.S. And so you're seeing the growth areas happen to be international. Local for global essentially just means that you're producing content in Spain, for example, in Spanish language for the global market. And you're getting just as many, or in some cases, more eyeballs than these big tentpole projects that we hear about here in the States.
Carl, is it worth talking about the tax incentives? Because
that's
really been what's driving so much of the production outside of California. Right. So it'd be interesting to see how that evolves in LA.
Before you invest, this is not a commercial. Your borrower, your partner, your operator has to really be on top of union labor issues, on top of running a business. Because SAG, AFTRA, DGA, IATSE, Teamsters, most of these studios are very union labor intensive, and there's certain operating issues the operator, your borrower, and you as financiers need to understand about that. The second are the tax credits. It is very much tax credit driven. So historically, people said, well, Tom Cruise doesn't want to, get on an airplane, leave home, and shoot somewhere. Well, now that he's a partner in the film,
if they can save $25 million on production,
Yeah.
and they go shoot in London, or they go shoot in another location, or even Budapest, or somewhere where there's a heavy tax incentive. That runaway production started with TV going to Canada in the 80s, and a lot of you will remember. And that's now spun into incentives across the United States. States you hear about like Georgia, New Mexico, Louisiana, where there's good tax incentives. They've grown huge businesses. Of course, I'm biased, but there's been an amazing multiplier and an economic impact to those regions because of the industry, and has been shown. That's why they keep renewing them. And New York is a good example. They just increased their overall tax incentive and the allocation per year. And I think that there's one thing that I like to throw out that puts it into perspective. Here in LA, I won't ask anybody to guess, but what's the percentage of film production that is film production that is shot in Los Angeles? It's 3%. Film. So the answer is large film and medium-sized film has left Los Angeles. It shoots elsewhere because of tax incentives. And is that going to come back? No, it's not. And so right now, the negative side of me would say the most important thing from a legislative perspective, from political perspective, is don't let TV also go, because that won't come back either. It doesn't mean that we have to be on par with the same exact tax incentive as Georgia, for example. LA's LA, but we're on par with New York would be a nice start.
So there's above the line, below the line. Some states say, I don't want to pay Tom Cruise's salary. Now there's also a DEI component emerging with a lot of the tax credits. Illinois, Georgia, et cetera, have really been pushing for that because they offer training programs for a lot of disadvantaged youth to come in, earn a trade, and earn a very adequate livelihood. So, because we were also watching the red-blue politics, would that affect more than DeSantis's battle with Disney in Florida, but there's a lot more of
the
that.
politics are super interesting because depending on the locale, it might be one side of the aisle versus the other. So here in California, of course, a Democrat controlled legislature. Hollywood scene is very Democratic oriented. But then you look at Louisiana, where, and we're the same in New York. We're the largest studio owner operator in New York as well, and the same in Louisiana. So Louisiana, it's the right side of the aisle, because the tax incentive is tied to tax credits. The tax credits can then be sold to oil and gas industry, from the productions to the oil and gas industry, and it's part of that ecosystem. And so you see actually from the right side of the aisle that they're pushing it. So
it's actually easier to deal with than the affordable housing panel we heard yesterday. I got a little dizzy with that one. We have a few minutes left. We threw a lot of jargon out at you. Perhaps this is a new topic for you. Please fire some questions, if you will.
Yeah, it's actually a follow-up question. So let's say we're sitting around here and we're all like, wow, this is really cool. Want to get into this space. The only way, we could do it easily is theoretically like, oh, there's one public company, which is HPP, which has like a sizable studio business. If we were going to leave here and be like, how would we start even valuing that business, given how much it is similar to like event planning or hospitality? Like, how would you go about even trying to value it?
The good news is it isn't rocket science. I mean, it's certainly not as complicated as the brilliant presentation before us. But there's just a high barrier to entry because of access to sort of the answers. Groups like Gensler for sure. Folks that have experience, especially like Carl. Our group, because our upside is our ability to grow our platform, we do a lot of advising for serious investors on projects that we don't own and may not even invest in, but that happen and that we end up operating and or providing the equipment to drive revenue. So I think talking to an expert in the field is the best way to sort it out and kind of get through all the noise would be my example.
There's a couple of appraisers around the country who understand the revenue streams. There's a couple of lead lenders, Deutsche Bank, Goldman, et cetera.
Key metrics or anything that you guys look at, or is it just too idiosyncratic?
If you're not shooting for a double-digit IRR, eventually, however you get there, But a lot of these, there's no finite hold period. It's not like, what's my 10-year hold IRR? It's really more getting up to that double digit, getting positive arbitrage on the financing, and continuing to grow the OpCo side of it.
And while we're private, HPP and friends there, that on a public side, and the Blackstone's their 49% partner, they own, and full disclosure, I was at Hudson years ago, and they have a great footprint of studios on Hollywood, but those had Netflix long-term leases. And so that's sort of the hub there. They are interested in growing their platform, and they have a couple projects. I don't want to announce anything if it's their secret, but that they're looking to do. But currently their portfolio is those 3 smaller studios, historic in Hollywood, that had those master leases. So great product, but a little different than...
I'm not sure it's a public company. It's a REIT investment because of UBIT, because of all the variable income streams. I don't know.
Let's thank our entertainment.
Thank you.